I don't remember much, but I remember being on the ground. He was over top of me. My clothes were off. I kept saying, like, you're hurting me. The next thing I know is there's a bunch of people with camera phones taking pictures. I don't know what they're doing, and they're saying things.
You came to the RCMP wanting to personally contribute to your community, and we failed you. We hurt you.
The numbers are now in, and they revealed over 250 of these cases have been incorrectly classified as unfounded.
Hello, everyone. I'm Habiba Nosheen. I'm the co-host of CBC's The Fifth Estate, and I'm delighted to be here today with these women to talk about a very important investigation by the Globe and Mail that's also sparked a lot of dialogue in Canada about policing and the way that crimes against women are investigated. I'm joined by Police Chief Leanne Fitch from Fredericton, Robyn Doolittle of the Globe and Mail, and Pamela Palmater, a lawyer, professor, and a social justice activist. Welcome. Robyn, I want to start with you. Unfounded was a 20-month-long investigation by the Globe and Mail that examined sexual assault cases classified by the police as unfounded. What made you want to embark on this investigation, and were you surprised by the findings?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always loath to start a conversation with Jian Ghomeshi, but that is where this story started for me. I'm sure you guys don't need a recap of the Jian Ghomeshi story, but in the summer of 2015, I was thinking about what I was going to be doing next on the Globe and Mail's investigative team, and at the time, this entire country was just gripped by this question: does the criminal justice system discriminate against women? And I was wondering if there was a way to approach this from an investigative standpoint, that this wasn't just a gut feeling. And I initially thought I would be looking at the court system, and I was interested to see if individuals who had been accused of sexual assault had had previous claims against them dismissed as false. And then I realized, actually, I couldn't do that investigation because the basic data did not exist. It was not possible to find out anything about the number of complaints that were being branded as false or baseless. And that's really what started this story. The Unfounded investigation was two-pronged. One, it was data-focused. How many cases are each police service dismissing as unfounded, which means this is not a real complaint, this is not a legitimate complaint. And then I also looked at 54 specific instances of sexual assault to see what was happening in those investigations. And what it found was that regardless of whether a case was classified as unfounded or not, sexual assault cases were not being treated as seriously as other crimes, despite the fact that it's the second most serious crime in the criminal code. And yes, it took 20 months, and I could talk about it forever, but I'll stop there for now.
And you just said you interviewed dozens of women, I think 54 in total. Was there a key pattern that you noticed in their stories?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, what was really crazy and what I went against what I was initially thinking is it really didn't matter. Even the cases that went to court had problems. So among the situations I was finding, a lack of understanding around Canadian consent law, that we have an affirmative consent standard. It's not no means no. It's not, I mean, no means no does mean no. But it's not that you have to say no, or you have to fight, or you have to resist. You have to have torn clothing. It's an affirmative consent standard. You have to indicate yes. I found a lack of understanding around our incapacity laws. If someone is too drunk or if they're under duress, you can't consent to sexual activity. I found basic investigative steps like interviewing witnesses, looking for a suspect, collecting surveillance footage, getting a bar bill, things that are done in other types of crimes were routinely not being done in sexual assault investigations.
And as a direct result of the Globe and Mail's investigation, police services across the country have started re-examining the cases that they had previously classified as unfounded. And Leanne, you're the chief of police in Fredericton, and your office started a review of these cases as well.
Yes, we did.
And I wonder, as a female police chief, and I think one of only 9 in Canada, what was it like to hear that when women were coming to the police, their stories were not being taken seriously, including by your own police department?
Well, I'd have to say that when I first heard the story when it broke, and of course I know from the right to information requests that there was work being done to examine police response to sexual violence and in the criminal justice system. But when I heard the results, and certainly in the province of New Brunswick, our results were very, very high. You know, I'm here to speak, more on behalf of my own department rather than other police services. And I was pleased in one respect that our department actually was below the national average. You know, we have been doing a lot of things correctly, but that still means that we still had 16% of our cases that were being classified as unfounded. So immediately, as soon as I heard this story, and I knew how badly it was reflecting on my own province, I called immediately to some of our community partners and said, "This is a big issue. We need to get on this right away." And I have to say that certainly the government of New Brunswick has helped to lead the charge on this going forward. But very upsetting, obviously, to hear that. And
were you surprised?
No. No, not necessarily surprised, disappointed. You know, I've been in policing for 33 plus years, and we have worked very hard over the years to change police response and police intervention and prevention in the area of sexual violence. So I know that there's still a lot of work to do, but I also know how much good work has been done to move the needle in the right direction. And so it was more disappointing than surprising.
And as you said, you've been a police officer for the last 33 years in a workplace that's, I think it's safe to say, pretty male-dominated. Can you talk to me a bit about what's that been like, and have you seen a shift at all in how things were when you first started?
Oh yes, there's been a shift. I have a lot of stories to tell, but I'll try and keep it concise. No,
we'll let you go off if you want to share.
No, it's been, you know, I've had people say, you know, gee, it's been hard, Chief, the last couple of years, and I'm sure many of you in the audience know that we just lost 2 of our officers and 2 of our citizens a month ago today. And I've had a lot of people say, "Gee, Chief, you know, you're doing good, and it's been a long, you know, hard year or hard month." And I'm like, actually, it's kind of been a hard 33 plus years. And so it's yes, I have seen a difference, but it has been through a lot of hard work, a lot of community work to move some of the internal culture of the police department. It doesn't only happen from the inside; it has to happen from the outside in, the inside out, right? And I think that that's one of the fundamentals of this whole discussion, is that there isn't any one aspect of an organization or a profession that is responsible for the unfounded. I think that there's a lot of work that we can do collectively to change things, and so too that's the case within our own policing culture. Right.
Can you give me any specific challenges that you have faced in having this conversation with your own colleagues about the gender biases that may exist? Is there resistance to acknowledging that?
There has been, and I want to be complimentary to those male counterparts who have got it, right? My predecessor was chief of police for a few years before I went into the chief's role, and he was a self-proclaimed feminist before it was cool to be a self-proclaimed feminist, right? You know, looking back over the course of my career, if there was different leadership, my destiny might have been very different, to be honest. So it's, yeah, there's There's certainly specific examples I can give, most notably, and I have a colleague here that is here representing the International Association of Women Police and also the Atlantic Women in Law Enforcement. And that's where I have found some of my headbutting over the course of my career, is that I still get asked by peers, by subordinates, well, Chief, if you want equality in policing, how come you have this special group for women in policing? And my standard answer has been for a very long time, guys, until I'm the only girl not in the room, I will continue to support the International Association of Women Police, and I will continue to support the Atlantic Women Law Enforcement. And those are some of the very basic conversations we have. So if you can imagine, just even on that, getting people to understand, both men and women, I might say, getting men and women both to understand that there's a need for that kind of mentorship, development, exposure, networking opportunity to build women up in our profession. And I'm a strong believer in, our safe communities begin at home, and they begin with individual, intimate partner relationships. And if you don't get it right on the front, and if you don't change gender bias and challenge other things in our society, then it breaks down a very, very basic level.
Pam, I want to bring you in on the conversation as well. You've been quite critical of the police, and in particular, their relationship with the Indigenous communities. One of the main things that you say that you want to see happen is more accountability, addressing what you call a culture of impunity. Can you talk to me about what you mean by that?
Well, I think it's really important that we're actually having this conversation on the traditional territory of Mississaugas of New Credit, because this isn't new. This didn't start with Unfounded. This didn't start with, gender equality. This is since Contact. That the perpetrators in our communities have been police officers. The very first perpetrators were police officers as rapists. And this is why we have murdered and missing Indigenous women, because if you're a perpetrator of sexual violence against Indigenous women and girls or Black women or other racialized people, how likely is it that you're going to actually investigate others that come with those claims? And I think this culture of impunity is, the other way of calling it is a culture of corruption. It's when one of your other peers are doing something wrong and you don't report it as a police officer. It's when, because for every perpetrator, there's at least 10 that know that's happening and they don't do anything to report it, or worse, they cover it up. And we know the RCMP has done investigations about, widespread corruption in the RCMP. There's been Human Rights Watch reports about police as perpetrators, as rapists, as human traffickers, as manufacturers of child porn, specifically targeting Indigenous women and girls. And why is that? Because this isn't just a gendered issue, this is an intersectionality between gender and race. And they believe as they've colonized the lands in this territory, they've also colonized our bodies, and that venomous mindset has never left the police force. And while things are improving internally, as amongst police officers, there's less discrimination in hiring, less discrimination, in promotions, that says nothing about what's happening between police officers and women on the ground, especially vulnerable Indigenous women and girls.
Leanne, clearly some of the concerns that Pam is raising, you've heard before. What do you say to Pam and other women who don't trust the police that they can protect or help them protect their communities?
Pardon me, this isn't obviously a new conversation at all, and early in my career I remember sitting on different panels and different work groups at government and the status of women back in the day, now women's equality branches, and having these same conversations. And as a young officer I was really offended, right? I was like, well, hold it, now I don't feel that way about the service that I'm providing in our community, and that was from the perspective of somebody in their young 20s. But what I do know is that the paintbrush approach to any issue is never, doesn't dig down deep enough to the detail to look at the root cause. And I talk about policing, I talk about recruiting. We recruit from the human race. And are there things within a policing culture that may or may not shape somebody's development or mindset as they go through their career? We're hoping that we're shaping those mindsets and development in the right direction. But we recruit from the human race, and there are no perfect human beings that I'm aware of. And so that's why I say, as a society, we have to address these issues, whether it's race-related, the intersectionality between race and gender and those most vulnerable, and mental health, and the list goes on. And until we have those conversations, both inside organization, outside organization, we are going to continue to see that we don't always get it 100% right. And it's a challenge. We were talking earlier backstage about you know, the recruiting process and the training process. I think most people would be shocked to know in this day and age that our police officers only get 6 months of training before they go out into the field, right? 6 months. And then it's up to individual agencies to continue to train and develop.
Robyn, I want to come back to you. Your reporting found some pretty troubling patterns. Moving forward, though, are you optimistic? Is there a path forward to the police culture in this country where you do see changing attitudes?
One of the strangest things that unfolded in my investigation was, as with any time you do a big story, you always give the other side a chance to comment, and you give them, ideally, lots of lead time. So in the months before the story ran, I sent a detailed, I call it my due diligence emails. It's like dozens of questions. It outlines exactly what's in the story, exactly what I'm going to say about this police service, where they fit in the context of the story. I sent it to, you know, more than the 100 of police services that were taking part of the series, and I think 10 responded with a proper response. Most ignored, some sent me a few paragraphs of boilerplate, we're not going to comment. And so I did not have high hopes because there just seemed a complete lack of interest in the series. Well after the story, I actually used freedom of information laws to access the email conversations that were taking place between the communications officers, which is my favorite journalism trick. And I saw that when I was sending out these emails, there was this national conversation between all these media relations officers who were making like not an insignificant amount of money to communicate with the public, arguing about the fact that like they don't think they should have to participate in this series. It's not in the public interest to, and again, I'm not painting all police services, but a lot of them. And we don't think it's in the public interest to participate in this series. I'm sick of the media criticizing us. Maybe if we don't respond, she'll just like move away, or like she's confused. Anyway, the series came out and it was like overnight there was reaction. And I have a lot of theories about why that happened. I don't think it's insignificant that we have key women in positions in government that were tweeting, because the government was the same. I'd sent them requests and got very little back. And then our Attorney General and you know, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, they're tweeting like, read this story, you need to see this. And then I would retweet it, and then I would call the department and be like, well, the minister just tweeted that this is really important. And it was like overnight. And with, you know, we did a big survey at the end of the year to assess, and it's more than half of the country is now being policed by a police service that is actively looking at or already implementing civilian case review. So think about that. These are police services that are saying they're going to the rape crisis centers in their communities and inviting these civilian advocates in to go through the raw police files. This is unheard of that this is happening. Half the country is now living in a police service that is implementing trauma-informed training. 37,000 sexual assault cases were being reviewed because of the series. When I was earlier watching the Prime Minister talk, I got a text message from one of the women featured in the series who had her case dismissed. I will cry because I always cry when I say this. She was raped when she was 13, and her case was dismissed as unfounded, and the guy just was sentenced to 5 years in jail like an hour ago. And I think what's really, I think what's going to happen here is it's a domino effect. Peer pressure is powerful, and if peer pressure is saying, don't talk about the guy that you're seeing at work that's doing something shady or criminal, and now peer pressure is, we need to report on that person who's doing something shady or criminal, or you need to be a police service that's in line with the times, that recognizes that this is not the 1960s anymore. That is where you're going to see change. So even some of the holdouts that, I know I'm giving a really long answer here, but even some of the holdouts in the early months after the series are coming around. And I really think it's peer pressure. Just today I also saw that Angie McNeely in Kingston has been named the new chief of police in Kingston, so another female police chief. And Angie has been instrumental in creating change for with respect to sexual assault cases since the series came out. And the fact that she was given that platform to make that change and has now been named Chief of Police is huge. So I am very optimistic. I'm not saying it's going to go away anytime soon. We all need to be vigilant, but I do feel optimistic.
Pam, I want to go back to you and some of the concerns that you raised. What would your main ask be of the Canadian Police in order for us to get to a point of change?
I want a public inquiry into every single police force in this country on sexualized violence. That's my first one. The second one is, it's almost like a reverse. We are not going to professional development or cultural awareness training our way out of police raping people. That's something that has to have consequences. There has to be a zero tolerance policy, and many police forces will say, oh, we have a zero tolerance policy. But the only way we will know what's happening is if we get past unions, get past leadership to aggregate data on the number of complaints brought by on police officers. I mean, we've had Human Rights Watch reports come to Canada, put a highlight on police officers raping Indigenous women and girls, not investigating murdered and missing Indigenous women. I mean, I think it's fantastic that there's a review, civilian review over these unfounded cases. But for the National Inquiry on Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, investigating police is off the table. A forensic review of all those files are off the table. So we still have a problem when it comes to murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, and there has to be consequences. The zero tolerance means you're gone. You don't get a free lawyer, you don't get paid leave, you don't get to go on a 2-year vacation, and then find that, well, we're dismissing these cases. Has to be consequences, we have to root them out.
Robyn and Leanne, I want to give both of you the chance for a last word as well. And I wonder if you can answer, what's the main takeaway from a conversation like this? Can we fix the system? Leanne, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Can we fix the system? It's a system that is imperfect. My father used to call it the just ice system. And there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that it is very important to have strong men and women in leadership positions that, as Pamela mentioned, you know, the accountabilities, the ethics, the integrity. It's a complicated issue that requires a complicated response. And I think, you know, my own track record with my department has been solid. But even at that, even I'm proud of the work that we've done. I know that we can continue to improve.
I think just to Pamela's point, the change that came about in Canada was brought about by journalism. And a big problem that we have in this country, I know we're very overshadowed by our dark and gloomy neighbor, and it makes us feel like we're living in the world of rainbows and unicorns. And I'm not saying that that's not true in some areas, but this series took me 20 months to report. I'm very grateful to work at the Globe and Mail that funded this. I think it cost a little more than $500,000 to do this investigation. The unfounded numbers took me more than a year to collect through hundreds of Freedom of Information requests. The FBI sent me the unfounded numbers for the United States in a couple of hours after I emailed them. Canada has obsessively restrictive transparency laws around access to information. We wouldn't need the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Inquiry to do a forensic audit of police services and have the government do it if journalists could do it. And journalists can't do it because police files, like all government files in this country, are Canada shields them. Like, very ridiculous. In the United States, BuzzFeed did a review of unfounded cases as well, and they were able to obtain the police files from the sexual assault cases. They were redacted, and not everyone gave it to them, but a lot of police services did. I had to get the sexual assault complainants themselves to file for the Freedom of Information request. There is a balance between personal privacy and transparency, but Canada always errs on the side of privacy, and it shields our democracy from being the best thing that we can be. So that, I think, is something that you can all take away to remove the rainbow sunglasses here and be woke on that front too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone on the stage for this incredible conversation. We will now take a quick break. I'm told only 10 minutes, so please be back here at 3:07.